Hi, my name is Ruben Mena. I'm in 10th grade. This is my ninth ILP, my 5th year at Northern Waters, and my project is on building a performance engine. My essential question for this project is how can I find the correct performance parts to make my engine reliable and easy to drive? So the first step is trying to figure out why build a performance engine. So in our case, the truck that we bought had a small block Chevy in it, and we drug it out of the woods and tried to get it running and found that the engine was seized. So from there, we kind of tore the whole truck apart, and then we found a good deal on a Ford engine. The truck happened to be four-wheel drive, and it had a manual transmission in it. So we found a Ford small block 302 with a 5-speed transmission, and it had a transfer case with it. So we decided to put that engine in the truck instead, since it was a good deal and we had the engine and there's parts are pretty common. So the next step is kind of choosing where to find the parts. So it's actually pretty easy nowadays to find parts. I found all my parts online, and for an example, if you just type in performance cylinder heads, a bunch of websites will pop up, and there's usually pretty good deals and good name brand stuff on there. And it's kind of the same way looking for parts. You got to know what you're looking for and what you got to choose. And that brings me to my next point: how to choose the parts. So you got to find what horsepower you want to make. So we decided to go with 300/400 because the truck's pretty old and the transmission is meant for the stock horsepower rating, which isn't that much to begin with. So we don't want to start breaking things because we're making too much horsepower, but we also want it somewhat fun to drive. So you gotta choose the parts. You can make, I don't know, I've seen people make 800 horsepower with these Ford small blocks, and that's really pushing it, and it won't last very long making that much power either. So we decided to go with about 300/400 horsepower. So the first thing a lot of people look at is the intake manifold and cylinder heads. So when building a performance engine, a lot of people just buy the intake manifold and then buy the carburetor that goes with it. So in our case, the engine that we had was electronic fuel injection. So it doesn't even really have an intake manifold on it. It just lets the air in and then it injects the gas right into the intake manifold. So we need to get an intake manifold that will accept a carburetor, a 4-barrel carburetor in our case, and one that flows good. So we decided to go with the Edelbrock parts because we already had the carburetor. We know how to work on them, and they make a bunch of performance parts that are fairly reliable. So we're going with the Edelbrock intake manifold and cylinder heads. And once you get that stuff, we want to squeeze as much power out of these parts as we can. So we're going to do what's called porting and gasket matching. So basically, this picture down here, you can see the unported cylinder head is what a cylinder head from the factory would look like, just cast. And then the ported part is what you do to the head or intake manifold. So you basically lay the gasket on there and then just grind out the metal until it matches the gasket so you can get as much flow as possible through. And then the next thing you want to look at is carburetors. There's 4-barrel and 2-barrel carburetors that you can choose from. You can look at the CFM and see what you need and if you even need a performance carburetor. So the 4-barrel carburetor versus a 2-barrel carburetor. A 2-barrel carburetor has 2 venturis that run all the time and allow gas into the engine while it's running. A 4-barrel carburetor is like a 2-barrel carburetor, but there's 2 extra venturis that let more gas in when you really step on the gas, giving you that extra little bit of power. So since we're already buying a new intake manifold, we're going to go with the 4-barrel carburetor. The next thing you want to look at is CFM. or the cubic feet per minute of air it can flow through the carburetor. So they make calculators to decide what CFM carburetor you need. For the engine we're building, it's going to be around 600 to 650 CFM. And if you wanted to build like a 450 cubic inch or 460 cubic inch engine, you would want to go into the 900, 1000 CFM range, just for an example. And do you even need a performance carburetor? If you're putting a performance carburetor, or if you're putting a performance carburetor on an engine, it probably already was carbureted. And a lot of Ford engines from the factory that were carbureted came with 2 barrels, so a lot of people just put an intake manifold and a carburetor on it and call it done. And most Chevy small blocks from the 70s and 80s came with a 4-barrel carburetor. And our engine that was in the truck was from the 60s, and it was a small displacement, a 283. So it only came with a 2-barrel. So, yeah. The next thing a lot of people look at are camshafts. So what is a camshaft? It is a shaft in the engine that has lobes on it that control the rocker arms that push the valves down. So there's 3 different variables you can change on a camshaft for what you're doing: lobe separation angle, or LSA, lift, and duration. So lobe separation angle is the angle that separates the lobes. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you can change that. And there's a bunch of little things that it changes. It doesn't do a lot, but if you change it a lot, it does affect quite a bit of the way the engine runs and what power it makes. It can make more torque or less torque at different RPMs, and raise or lower horsepower to different RPMs. And the next thing a lot of people upgrade is lift. So lift is the height of the lobe on the camshaft, and it decides whatever your lift is, that's how far the valve goes times 1.5 or 2, depending on what rocker arms you have. And the next thing people look at is duration, and that's how long the valve will stay open. That's another variable you can change on the camshafts. And that's pretty much it for that part. And really the answer to my essential question is, once you do all the research and find your parts, you really got to just go out in the shop and tinker with things and tune on things. And there's a lot of little things you got to do to make an engine reliable and easy and fun to drive. But really, once you get all the hard stuff done, it's really very nice knowing that you built your own performance engine and there's something that you know you built so you can trust it. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned something from it, and thank you.